All right, so today what I want to talk about is what we are trying to accomplish when we're using an EQ in a mix. And so obviously it's going to be different for every single sound. It's going to be different depending on your song, what you're working on yourself. But if you learn the different reasons why we tend to use EQs and then how we tend to solve those problems or accomplish those goals, then you can take that and adapt it for whatever you're working on. So that's kind of the idea behind today. So I'm going to talk about a few different goals, problems, things we tend to work on with EQs and how I personally tend to do it. And they're all, some of them are kind of similar to each other. I'll talk about some of the similarities and differences. There is some overlap between each of these, but I do think of them as being each their own distinctive goal or solution to a problem, right? So you might have heard people talk about with EQing the basic idea of subtractive versus additive, right? So when we talk about EQing, we're talking about either raising a band of frequencies, and that's just raising it in levels. We're talking about decibels often with that, or we're lowering a band of frequencies, right? That's all it is. So if we're talking about additive EQing, we're increasing those levels. If we're talking about subtractive EQing, we're reducing those levels. And you might have heard people say that we boost wide and then we cut narrowly, right? So we have it more narrow when we tend to cut. And these are just some general rules that some engineers tend to follow. Not everyone follows them. You don't have to follow them, but it's good to know that they exist, know that these concepts are around. I believe I've talked about, the subtractive and additive thing, the boost wide, cut narrow thing. I believe I've talked about that in previous videos, so I'm not going to dig into it too much here, but I just figured it'd be good groundwork to start with before we actually start talking about this list of goals and concepts that I wanted to talk about today. All right, and so for the session that we're looking at today, this is just my example YouTube session that I have on my computer. Basically what I've done is I've grabbed a couple samples off Splice. So these are samples that they have the same tempo, and I've just pitch shifted one to help match the key. And other than that, I haven't done anything to them. So they're just here as examples because I don't want to have to worry about copyright issues with this video. So here we are. They're just here to be material for us while we're talking about EQing. So the first thing that I like to do is I like to think about EQing as puzzle pieces. So if you start out with something, I kind of think about it this way. You start out with the instrument, right? And the instrument might be like a little square piece of cardboard, if you're thinking about the puzzle piece analogy. And what we're doing with the EQ is we're kind of making those little notches and those little tabs to help the puzzle pieces fit together better. So for example, what I might do, so this example, it's vocals and keys. So if I hit play, you can hear it. Oh, I labeled it keys, but it's actually a guitar. So let me actually change this. I had keys here earlier. Okay, so it's a guitar and vocals. And so what I might do here, if I'm thinking about this puzzle piece analogy, right? If I'm puzzle piecing these two together, is I might boost something in the vocals to help them pop out a little bit more. And then I might cut a little bit in the same range within the guitar to then help those vocals pop out even more so, right? So if I'm using this technique, for example, on these two, what I might do, this EQ that I'm holding right here, it's on the guitar. I'll pull up the guitar actually, and then I'll also pull up the vocals here on the left, and I'll kind of do them in tandem. So, a lot of times when we want to make vocals a little more airy and poppy and, pop out a little bit more, we tend to boost 10K. It's not something you want to just mindlessly do. I might not do that in this actual sample if I were actually using it on something, but, I'm just going to use 10K as an example here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to boost 10K a little bit, just subtly is how I like to use it if I'm doing this puzzle piece thing. And then I'll cut the same thing within the guitar. And I might show you that around 3K too. So let's try that and see how it feels. So now I'll play with and without. So I'll cut this in and out so you can hear the difference. So So it's pretty subtle, but if you do this in a bunch of different ways across your entire mix, it'll have an impact, right? So for example, if I want the vocals to feel a little more powerful, I might do this towards the lower range of the vocal. And if it just depends on the instrument, what you want to pop out in the mix, what do you think that featured frequency range is within the instrument? What is like the hook for the frequency range for the instrument? That's a weird way of saying it, but I hope that makes sense. It's my little puzzle piece theory way that I like to think about it. All right, so the next thing that I like to think about is noise and clutter reduction. So this one is, for example, if you do a high and low pass filter on something to help cut out ranges of that instrument, that track, that we don't think there's going to be anything necessary within. So for example, here's my vocals. What I might do is kick this on. And I like to do 12 decibels per octave to start. I'll do a steeper slope if I want more character to the EQ. But I might kind of just reduce everything below that fundamental of the voice. So let's listen. And same thing with the guitar, a lot of times I'll cut into the bottom range of the guitar to help give more room for the bass and the kick to exist. So, and I might, especially with guitar is a really good example of this because a lot of times we will cut out, with the vocals, it might just be like someone, like a low wind burst or something that you end up cutting out. It's not none of the actual singing really often that you're cutting out. But with guitar and some other instruments like keys and stuff, we might cut a ton at the top and the bottom of the range so that that instrument kind of just lives in a more narrow frequency spectrum. And that's so that things that really shine, for example, in the low end, like the kick and the bass and stuff like that, those can then not get muddied up by the guitar or the keys. So sometimes that's kind of a form similar to the puzzle piece theory, right? Because you're taking stuff out, removing stuff to kind of give room for something else to shine in that area. So let me just bring this back and you can listen to the kick. There's not a ton else in here. I just have the kick and the guitar and the vocals, but listen to the kick and how as I bring this up, it helps it. So sometimes I might cut, a ton out of the guitars. I might go even higher depending on, how much is in the mix. So it's one of those things where you want to think about it and you want to listen and you want to use your ear. But that's another concept is just kind of cleaning up the clutter, helping avoid the mud by often it's just high pass or low pass filtering. But yeah, that's that. Sometimes I'll do a high pass filter on something to kind of cut the clutter that's really, really high. And I kind of like this because I like warmer sounds and I like more analog type sounds. So we don't need a ton in the high end for that. And sometimes, I'll bring it even farther down depending on how it sounds in the mix. So it's something to experiment with is that kind of concept, that kind of idea. And the big thing that I see with people when they're first learning to mix is being afraid to cut into something like this in the guitar, right? You're afraid to cut out stuff that sounds good, but just because it sounds good in isolation doesn't mean that that's going to help it fit into the mix. It might be cluttering it up. It might be muddying it up. So don't be afraid to try bringing this up, especially if a ton of other elements down here. Don't be afraid to cut out stuff that might sound good in isolation, but it might not be so good in our mix because those are two different things. You don't want to be just doing this in solo. You want to hear how it interacts with everything else in the mix. All right, so the next thing that I like to think about with EQing is you're remedying something that's abrasive, for example. So for example, with vocalists, a lot of times we'll get whistle tones where it's kind of like a harsh whistle in the voice. And what I'll do is I'll bring up something that's very, very narrow Q and I'll drag it around and listen for that whistle. And you don't want to be bringing it up so high that you're creating a whistle. You want to know that you hear the whistle before you actually go for it. So this vocal probably isn't the best example, but you want to drag it around, find where that whistle is, and then bring it all the way down. And you can either do this or oftentimes there's actually a notch value here, and that'll help cut some of the harshness, some of that abrasiveness within your mix. And so you can do this on a range of different instruments, but it's kind of like the idea of reducing harshness, reducing abrasiveness, reducing whistles, unwanted sounds that are fairly narrow in frequency range, but they, it helps to improve the mix to bring them out. That's really all I have to say about that. And I mean, we can listen to this, but it's not going to be a huge difference here. And you can do similar stuff too. Like I've noticed sometimes with vocalists, certain frequency ranges, like sometimes 5K and 1K tend to be culprits, I've noticed, where it's like kind of a wider frequency range that's an issue. And often it's when they get louder and they get a little more tense sometimes. And preferably you fix this in tracking. But if they get a little tense, sometimes there's harshness that comes out, especially on the louder notes. And in that case, what I'll do is I'll find that frequency range here and I'll make it dynamic so that when it gets loud, you can set it so that, past a certain threshold, then it kicks in and reduces that frequency range. And that's kind of another way to reduce harshness. And so this is going into dynamic EQ world, right? So it may or may not be an option in your EQ. It's like, depending on what tools you have, you're going to have slightly different options. But it's another great thing to use dynamic EQ to help you reduce something that's a bit too much when things get a little too loud, right? So I use that a lot to help kind of control things. Another example of that is, for example, with cymbals. Oftentimes they get a little too abrasive when they get louder, when everything builds in energy with the drum part. And so what I like to do is I'll set dynamic EQs in those frequency ranges, and it might be fairly wide, in those frequency ranges to help when it gets a little bit louder and more abrasive, just kind of tame a little bit of that abrasiveness and keep, the nice warmer, splashy, it's not splashy, but the warmer sounds that we like about the cymbals, it allows you to keep more of the energy without becoming a little too much and painful to listen to. So that's another thing you can do. And so the last idea I want to mention here, it might be one of the simpler ideas, out of all of these, right? But it's the idea that each track, each instrument, each microphone, whatever you're looking at in the mix, right, may have its own frequency range where it's kind of shining. So what I like to do is I kind of bring things up and drag around and hear where it feels like it's popping out in the mix the way I want it to. It's present in the mix the way I want it to. I'm not muddying things up. And it's kind of like that idea. You kind of like boost the good part, the part that you want in the mix. And you want to do this within context for the whole mix, but you boost the part that benefits that instrument within the mix. So I guess I'll do that really quick with this vocal. Let me, I guess I'll leave all this stuff in place. Honestly, I'm really liking the low end of this. I love low female vocals, though, so much. I like the low end, and I'm liking up on a high here with these headphones, so I feel a little handicapped because I'm not listening to my speakers. But, like, for example, if I like that low end feeling, I want it to kind of come out a little bit more. It's not fighting a ton of other stuff in the mix right now because I don't have many other elements. Then I might kind of do this and boost it, and I might... that may be kind of extreme. That's not too bad. And I might bring this up even more. I kind of liked the light airiness on this. So I'm just popping out the parts that I like that feel good when I pop them out in the mix and not popping out the other stuff. And I might even reduce some of the other stuff, like with bass guitars, for example, a lot of times I'm boosting around the fundamental. I'm cutting around like the 300 range to help reduce mud. A lot of different instruments have a ton of content within that range, so we tend to get things muddying up within that range around 300. And then I might boost some stuff up above that to help it kind of pop through, help those transients cut through. So let me just hit play here. So hear how they just kind of interact with each other a little differently. They pop out a little differently. It's all these little moves, it's like with mixing, we're making a ton of little tiny moves and then it influences the whole thing overall. And again, like with some of these moves I made, I might not make with these actual samples if I were working them with them. For example, this I just blindly threw in there. So, grain of salt with everything I just did, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of the approach that I use when I'm EQing. So I hope that helps someone out there. Let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments below, all that stuff. I'd appreciate it. And I do have a Patreon, so it's patreon.com/CatoNoise. It helps my channel stay independent. So please consider checking it out if you feel so inclined. We have a Discord server we're hanging out on. We've been doing a book club with a few of us. It's been a lot of fun. We're reading audio and music production book club books in the book club. And there's some additional content on my website. I post early releases on there as well. So please check that out if you feel so inclined. And other than that, I come out with new videos every Wednesday. And thank you so much for hanging out. Okay. I gotta go because I gotta get ready for my next thing at 2, which is about an hour from now. So I hope you're all doing well. Let me know if you like this style of video. I've been trying to kind of rework things a little bit more, thinking a little more consciously about what my topics are for my videos. So any feedback is appreciated. Thank you. Hope you're having a good day. Bye.